Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. Do you think it'll be as easy as she said it would? I asked Shikamaru as we saw Ino facing Raijin. No, he shook his head decisively. But she has her tricks. She'll be fine, he reassured with a shrug, and I nodded. Bold, that guy, Anko said, drawing a frown from both of us. We had seen Kirin speak, but he had done so in a normal volume, which meant that the words didn't reach our ears. You can hear them from all the way over here? I asked with a raised eyebrow. I can read their lips, brat, she corrected with a roll of her eyes. By the way, in case you were curious, that guy really wants to beat you. Gee, I wonder why I shot at her, my hand sliding over the railing over to where New Ivory rested next to me. I had taken Zabuza's words to heart and left the sword out. Although, I would need to get a sheath for it or something, since I didn't have anything to carry it on my person. Begin. Gecko called, for the last time, and my eyes narrowed as Raijin instantly unsealed a pair of swords. Wow, these guys really aren't being very subtle here, I muttered to myself, drawing humming sounds from Shikamaru and the senseis. Sasuke remained with his hard-to-read expression as usual, and Naruto made a confused "huh." Why did I say that? Because the swords were very obviously Kiba imitations, just like the Hiramekaya look-alike Choujura used before. These exams really are to show off, which makes me wonder. My thoughts were interrupted as the participants made their moves. Ino ran through a couple of hand seals, which drew a confused frown from me. Not because I was surprised she used a ninjutsu technique besides her clans though. The others had shown me not to expect that from any of them. No, the confusion came because after doing that, nothing happened. Nothing at all. I even sent a look around the arena to see if she had set up something of a trap, but nothing came up. Her opponent, however, didn't sit around to see what that was all about. Raijin rushed at her immediately, swords ready to start slashing at her. With her jutsu, whatever that might have been, done, Ino drew 2 kunai from her pouch and readied her stance to defend herself. From where I stood, Raijin seemed to be fast. As fast as me, actually, although that was without any of my active skills on, but it was still a lot, really. It was fortunate then, that all my friends sparred with me, using taijutsu and kenjutsu, regularly. Physical prowess was, after all, something that everyone needed, regardless of specialization. Still, as the blades clashed, I knew that Ino wasn't going to do so well. Even if she was used to the guy's speed, she still didn't have the skill to face the guy. And it showed. Slowly, she started to lose ground against Raijin, the guy pressing all her openings, no matter how small they were. And when she took a step back, I knew that her time was running out. Still, I muttered to myself as I looked at the two combatants. Something looks wrong here. Shikamaru's small smirk told me that, yes, there was something I was missing in the battle. Taking a moment to look deeper into both of their movements, I finally realized what it was. Why is Ino breathing like that? I asked worriedly. The Yamanaka was gasping for breath like she had been fighting for a day instead of just a minute. And I knew there was a reason for that. She wasn't the weakling that I had written about in my notes about Canon. There was something happening here. Is it the effect of that jutsu she used at the beginning? What does it do, then? I wondered to myself. There was no time to ponder on that, however, because things changed again then. Ragen's slash went wide, giving Ino an opening to cut his upper arm with her kunai. At that, the Kirinin jumped back visibly confused. Narrowing my eyes, I caught the guy blinking rapidly and giving his head a little shake. I shared his confusion, honestly. I would have liked to know what the hell was happening down there. The boy seemed to reach a conclusion on what to do eventually though, while Ino waited with her guard up, trying to catch her breath. The Kirinin's new plan seemed to be much the same as before, but with a little more oomph to it, as some would say. His kibar imitations started sparkling with electricity all over and I immediately knew what that was. Chakra flow, ha! I mused with a frown. The lightning element wasn't really a surprise, since he was being trained to use kibar of all sorts. However, it was obviously bad for Ino, since she couldn't safely block the things with her metallic kunai now. Or, that's what I thought, because when Ragen rushed back in, that's exactly what she did. What? I asked out loud with wide eyes as I saw Ino take the hit with her weapon and remain perfectly fine. Her opponent reacted just like I did, but much louder. Anko's laugh behind me broke my concentration for a second before I focused my eyes back on the battle and how my friend continued to block the incoming enhanced attacks. It seems your friends were preparing to fight you, my sensei commented, sounding highly amused. I paused at those words and considered them. The secret jutsu additions to their skill sets had been a surprise, yeah. But this. She was right, I thought with an incredulous chuckle. They had prepared tricks and secret cards to fight me. Can you blame us? Sajuk asked from the side, with a raised eyebrow. The upwards curve on the corner of his mouth denoted that he was very amused by my reaction. You were the person to beat in this exam, for us at least. You guys, honestly I shook my head. Meanwhile, I could see the desperation starting to get to Ino's opponent. I couldn't blame him. If I had pulled a trick that my opponent countered perfectly without effort, I would have been afraid to. But the guy wasn't a swordsman in training, with capital S, for nothing. Jumping back, Ragen stuck both his swords on the ground. Ino let out a long breath out as she, once again, kept her guard up and ready. She had been on the defensive for much of the match, I realized, but she was doing something, that much was obvious to see. The Kirinin's next attempt was much different from his first two approaches, which had been reliant on his swordsmanship. This time, his swords weren't coated on lightning. No, instead, it looked like they became electricity itself. And then the charge shot towards Ino, who instantly jumped to the side. I didn't quite recognize the jutsu myself. It definitely wasn't one of the electromagnetic series, since it traveled through his weapons into the ground and then forwards. Sadly, Ino's attempt at dodging wasn't quite fast enough to succeed, her leg getting hit and leaving her twitching on the ground. Taking his swords out of the now broken ground, Ragen prepared to charge back in now that his opponent was weakened. However, I narrowed my eyes when he stumbled forward. What even did you do, Ino? I wondered to myself. The only clue I had was her strange breathing, but then it dawned on me and I grinned, chuckling to myself. Finally noticed. Anko asked and I could hear the smirk on her face. That tricky little shit, I muttered, my eyes firmly set on the arena. What did she do? Naruto asked curiously. It seemed that they hadn't shared their tricks between teams. Understandable, I guessed. Wouldn't you like to know, Seal Boy? I shot back with a smirk, earning a whine from the blonde. Finally, Rajan seemed to regain his bearings and ran forwards, much slower than he had before. Still, Ino had barely had the time to recover slightly before the swords came down on her. Her kunais almost didn't make it to block the assault, but she managed at the last second. The edge stopped barely an inch away from her face. I had to smile at the determined expression on her face. She really had changed. Still, I gotta hand it to the guy as he started his barrage once again. His skill remained just as good as it had been, regardless of what Ino was doing to him. My skill didn't drop by much with those kinds of things, but that was probably because of the system. After all, no matter what people did for me, short of maiming me, my skill would always stay up to par. Or, at least, that was the case with everything that I had had to deal with so far. Eventually though, the Kirinin's strikes started to falter. His arms didn't move as he wanted them to. Being too slow. Going slightly off. Not having enough strength. And his chance slipped by him. Pride strikes again, I said with a smile as I saw victory come my friend's way. If the guy had gone all out from the beginning, throwing that lightning jutsu from the beginning instead of showing off his sword skill, it would have been different. It hadn't been decided yet though, of course. To be fair, Ino looked like she was barely hanging by a thread, sweating bullets and gasping for breath in a way that I was sure had nothing to do with her jutsu anymore. Then, just as Rajan sent another double attack with his blades towards Ino, she jumped back. The Kirinin all but fell on his face as the now expected block didn't come. He was that out of it. Visibly psyching himself to get up, he put his hands on the ground and tried to push himself to his feet. It didn't quite work out. Ino, where she stood, let her arms down for seemingly the first time in the whole match. I could almost hear her praying that Rajan wouldn't stand up. She was on her last legs too, and that was only defending throughout most of the match. Still, a win's a win, and as the Kirinin finally fell to the ground without even trying to get up, Gecko announced hers. Well, most of us passed, so that's great, I commented with a proud smile. Shame for Sakura and Choji, Naruto sighed and I nodded in agreement. Secretly, I was more bummed by the second than the first, but there was no need to point that out. I liked Sakura all right, but I was just closer to Choji. We still got an odd number of participants passing, huh? I realized then with a raised eyebrow. Then, Gecko asked all winners to go to the arena, and, as everyone walked towards the stairs, I stayed back. IG? Anko asked and I looked at her with a serious expression. My teammate, the one that quit, Kabuto, I said with a click of my tongue. There was something going on there. There's no way he was exhausted from our time in the forest. Her eyes narrowed. What are you trying to say? Just an observation, I shrugged with an unsure expression. I just found it odd. We had days to rest, and he was still tired from a bit of healing. I'm no expert, but I like to think I know enough about healing to tell if someone should have exhausted himself or not, even with smaller reserves. She stared at me for a moment before nodding slowly. Go down there, kid, I nodded back and turned. That was as much as I could do on that front, I think, I thought, trying not to grimace. I hoped it would be enough. With everyone's paranoia sky high due to Orochimaru though. It should be enough, I reassured myself. Soon enough, the 11 winners were standing in front of the Hokage as he explained the third exam to us. 1 month, I mused as we heard, and some asked their questions. Not nearly enough to work on much. Probably enough to max 1 jutsu, an original one at least. I mused with a frown. 1 jutsu sounded like very little. Someone might have said that I needn't worry. After all, I had taken out Gara, and he was the one to beat in the exams, right? And that much was true, yeah. But the problem wasn't the exams. I could honestly care less about those. The problem was the crush. The invasion of Konoha that could or could not happen during the event. Orochimaru was coming to mess things up and kill our Kage. Suna and Oto attacked the whole village. And with the changes that had already been made, who knew what else could happen? The last thing I needed to do was take it easy. I have to make a more powerful jutsu, I noted mentally. From there, anything that helps is welcome. Eventually, it came time for us to draw the numbers for the finals. And the results were surprising, although they were also quite interesting, in my opinion. Naruto and I looked at each other with wide grins. For the first match, it would be Ino vs Kankuro, which sounded pretty interesting to me since they both used a little more discreet methods. The second match, announced right after them, almost made me laugh. I found it more than a little amusing that Shikamaru was dealt the same hand that he had in canon and had been pitted against Temurai. The third match was the important one though, for me at least. Me against Naruto. That would be a great fight regardless of whatever went on in it. And I was looking forward to it, since Naruto didn't use many seals in our training spars. I wanted to know what else he had up his sleeve. The fourth match would be Sasuke vs Akatsuki, which I was pretty sure the Uchiha would win. However, I was pretty sure that it would be, at the very least, entertaining to watch. I expected the I1 to make our friend work for his win, at least. And last, but not least, was Kurotsuchi vs Lee. Ninjutsu vs Taijutsu, as far as I was aware, that is. I'm looking forward to all the battles, really, I thought, grinning from ear to ear. The winner of that fight would have to fight against Chojuro since there was an odd number of participants left. Well, that's it, I said as Hiruzen dismissed us. Turning towards our group, I blinked repeatedly. Ino had her arms wrapped around Naruto's neck as he gave the girl a piggyback ride. What? I'm tired. That fight was tough, Ino defended herself. A bit too defensive there, aren't you, Ino? Shikamaru commented with a smirk. I continued staring. Is this a thing? I wondered, more surprised than anything else. Of all changes that I had caused, that wasn't one that I expected or even considered, but I probably should have. After all, if events could change as much as they had already, why wouldn't people end up with different partners? Granted, this didn't really mean that, but it was a nice reminder that nothing was set in stone. Still, my siblings grow up so quickly, I wiped an imaginary tear from the corner of my eye. You didn't tell Big Bro Ig that you two were together, you two? I exclaimed exaggeratedly, earning a wind Ig from both. Now, let's go visit Choji, Sasuke, Shika, lovebirds. And with that, I turned towards the exit with the Uchiha and the Nara grinning and holding back chuckles next to me. Behind us, a pair of blondes complained the whole way there. Oh! You were awesome, Choji. Naruto told the Akimichi as we all stood inside his room. His parents had told us that he had already been treated and just had to wait for the poison to be completely dealt with, which would take a day at most. For now, he needed to stay in the room just in case, but it fortunately allowed us to visit and all together. It was a really good fight, Choji, I nodded, and I was telling the truth too. He had done exceptionally well. Much better than he had in canon, that's for sure. Thanks, guys, Choji accepted with a bashful nod of his head. Still, I'll need to train harder. That's the spirit. I gave him a pat on his shoulder. Then, I sat back as the others gave him a rundown on how the other matches had gone. Congratulations were traded and soon enough we had to leave, lest the nurses started getting on our cases. As we stepped outside the room, I paused. There, further down the hall, stood Kankuro and Tamrai. I stopped walking and looked at them for a moment. That means Gaara is there, I thought, strangely curious. Strangely, because I hadn't even thought about the sand user that much after our match. Still, something nagged me in my mind, and I half suspected it to be Orochimaru or the purple thing that had started making a mess in my mindscape. But I knew it wasn't either of those. Guys, go ahead, I'll meet you guys back at home, I told the group who were eyeing me curiously. Are you going to eat at your houses or am I preparing a meal for everyone? We'll eat at home. Maybe tomorrow, Shika nodded, his eyes looking over my shoulder and probably guessing what I was about to do. He narrowed his eyes and stared at me before I gave him a nod. The Nara then took a deep breath as if calming himself and nodded back. Okay, keep an eye on these two, will you, guys? God knows what they'll do if left by themselves. IG. With a chuckle, I turned and we went our separate ways. Why am I doing this? I wondered as I approached two of the three Suna siblings. What do you want? Kankuro asked instantly as I drew closer, both of them tensing up. I wonder that too, buddy, I thought to myself before putting my hands up placatingly. I just wanted to see if he is okay, I replied, unsure. Do I look stupid to you? He asked with a frown and I tilted my head. Is that a trick question? I couldn't help but shoot back. After all, he did look very silly with that war paint, or whatever. That earned me a growl and a snort from Tamrai. I counted that as both a win and a loss. Look, I'm not stupid. I know you don't like me. Well, aren't you a genius? He interrupted sarcastically. But I'm just here to see if he is okay, and maybe talk with him, that's all, I finished explaining, ignoring his words. Both of them stared at me as if I had grown a second head. Which was fair, since I felt equally confused myself. Then, Kankuro smiled, which was all sorts of creepy. Mostly because I could guess what he was thinking. If he has a death wish, he can go right in, I could hear in my head with his voice. After all, I knew he probably still held a little bit of a grudge for the thing before the first test. It wasn't that much of a problem, really. If it got me what I wanted, all the better. Well, you can go in if you want, he is awake, he signaled the door, grinning from ear to ear. Looking at Tamrai, I saw that she was unsure, but still kept her silence. Thank you, I said flatly as I moved towards the door. Why am I doing this? I asked myself once again as I took a deep breath in and made my way inside. I had half expected the room to have sand flying all around with Gaara throwing a tantrum that I hadn't proved his existence. Instead, I found the redhead simply lying on his bed, looking at the ceiling with that dead stare of his. When I closed the door behind me, he turned towards me and I tensed up, preparing myself to flicker right out the window if things went south. Why are you here? He asked then, his voice as dull as his eyes. I would like to know that myself, I replied with a shrug, moving towards a chair in the corner of the room. I just felt like visiting. With that said, I looked at the seat for a second before turning and leaning against the wall on the side of the window instead. No need to make an escape more difficult for myself by sitting. Then, as we stared at one another, neither showing anything in our faces, silence fell in the room. It wrapped around everything so tightly that I would swear I didn't even hear the outside even being next to the window. No birds, no people. Nobody seemed to walk by in the hall either. It was just Gara and I. And I didn't know where the atmosphere had come from, if I was honest. I could go for the obvious and say that I was tense in the presence of a boy that was clearly a little out of it with a demon whispering in his ear. That I was on guard in case he attacked. However, that wasn't it. Did you prove it? Gara broke the spell first, almost making me jump in surprise. When I didn't immediately reply, he elaborated. Did you prove your strength? I remembered then, what I had said in our battle. And with that came the memory of the high I had been riding during the whole thing. A slight smile formed on my face as I considered his question. In the end, I nodded. Yes. I think so, at least I replied slowly. You were really strong, by the way. So, thanks for that. Thanks. He blinked at me, his head tilting the slightest bit to the side in confusion. Like the word was foreign to him. I needed a strong opponent. To prove my strength to myself. To prove that I could face the forces out there and maybe survive them. I mused out loud, almost like I was talking to myself. And you were that person. So, thank you. Silence returned this time, although it was quite as oppressive as it had felt before. And you, what was the deal with the prove my existence thing? I asked, internally preparing in case he snapped at my words. Instead, he looked out the window next to me for a moment and turned back to me. Why didn't you kill me? He asked instead of answering, his green eyes focusing on my red ones. I blinked at that, taken aback before I remembered what I knew about him. I didn't need to, I answered simply with a shrug. Everyone's always tried to kill me, the boy spoke, and I felt the slightest bit amused that this time it seemed to be him the one that talked to himself more than to me. That was sadly buried under the weight of what he was actually saying. I started thinking that was my purpose. To kill those who could kill me. That was the meaning of my existence. Also I thought, but you didn't kill me. I don't understand, he said, looking truly confused by what had happened. There were many reasons for not killing you, I replied then, ignoring the first part of his speech. But in the end, I didn't need to, so I didn't. I don't like killing, honestly. Not if I can avoid doing so. Then someone else will kill you instead, Gara declared, as if that was an universal truth. And to him, I supposed it was. It also, depressingly, was probably more true than not in the world we lived in. Anyone that is a danger to me or to my friends will die. My eyes stared intently at his, trying to convey how serious that vow was. Friends, he said then, in a way that seemed both confused and disbelieving. Yeah, they are all that matters to me, I nodded with a small smile. When we die, what do we take with us? What do we have then? I asked him, and he tilted his head. Nothing, I would imagine, he answered, looking like he was trying to decipher where I was going with my words. My smile turned sad. I think so too, I agreed. I know, so I corrected in my head. When I first thought that, I wondered what I would miss the most then. And the answer I came to was that I would miss my friends the most. My family. The people that I care about. So, that's what really matters to me. What I fight for. Silence fell on us, once again. But it felt like a peaceful one this time. My gaze moved to the side, looking out the window towards the street. This time the absence of words didn't hide the sounds of the world outside our conversation, I noticed. I was calm, in the presence of a boy that could kill me very easily if I let my guard down. That was strange. Is that why you are so strong? Gaara broke the silence again. Friends. Family. I like to think so. I mused. That I am the strongest when I fight for them. Did I just pull a talk no jutsu out of nowhere? I blinked when the realization hit me. Then, I turned towards the red-haired boy. Doesn't look like it worked though, I thought, somewhat dejectedly as I saw his expression remain empty. I wondered if Gaara would remain an enemy. I hope you recover soon, I said then, pushing myself off the wall and walking towards the door. We'll fight again, I heard just as I closed the door behind me. And I wondered then. Was that a threat, or a challenge? To test the limits of my abilities, the memory whispered in his ear as his fist hit the wood of the training dummy. Stinging pain shot through his hand, but he ignored it as his Sharingan glared at the unmoving, unliving target. How long had it been since he had actually thought about that day besides the occasional nightmare? It had once seemed impossible to get rid of it. The voice. The red eyes. The words. The message. However, time continued moving and so did Sasuke. He found new people to care for, reluctantly as it had been at the start. He found friends that stood by him, that walked next to him, despite the path he had set for himself. He even found a new family in IG and the rest of the group. Yes, even the annoying blonde he called a teammate. But the satyr had done something that the Uchiha hadn't thought possible, filling a hole that he thought he would carry within him forever. And Sasuke could finally put the past behind him. He would never forget, he knew that. However, he felt like he could finally live with it, at the very least. That is, until that happened. And that was said. You'll prove my strength. The words were so terrifyingly similar. They had set Sasuke on edge for a good while during the preliminaries, making him break in cold sweat. Still, even through the traumatic memory, Sasuke could still look at IG and say that the two brother figures of his life weren't the same. Both seemingly obsessed with power, yes, but fundamentally different in the end. In the method. One tested his abilities by killing his whole clan and mentally torturing his own brother. The other proved his strength by fighting a strong and likely unstable foreign ninja. Without killing them at that. His other hand hit the wood this time, much harder, and he knew that his knuckle was now bleeding on the training dummy that he had Naruto reinforce with seals. His fist, however, stayed against the bark as his shoulders sagged. Taking a shuddering breath in, he leaned his forehead against the wood. His hand moved down the dummy slowly. Red eyes with black tomo appeared in his mind, glaring at him. It would be worthless to kill someone as pathetic as you, the voice of his nightmares said harshly. Then the tomo disappeared. Take deep breaths, a softer voice whispered in his ear, and Sasuke did as it said. His chest rising as the air filled his lungs and moving down as he let it out. Foolish little brother, if you want to kill me, curse me, hate me. The first voice shouted. He almost flinched at it. Concentrate on my voice, okay? Deep, slow breaths. The second voice continued, unperturbed. A smile appeared underneath the red eyes in his mind. Inhale, he told himself, a grimace he hadn't noticed easing into a peaceful expression. Exhale. And live a long, unsightly life, run away. The cold voice mocked with an air of indifference. Run away, and cling to your pathetic life. Stand straight and relax your shoulders, the warmer voice continued instructing, advising more like. And Sasuke stood, shrugging his shoulders a bit and letting out a sigh. The face grew more detailed in his mind, with his pale skin and messy black hair. And someday, when you have the same eyes as me, come before me. I will, Sasuke muttered in a whisper. And when I do, I won't be alone, brother, he continued, his voice growing stronger as the words came out. The last word spat out like a curse. Because that's what brothers are for, right? Ig told him, more than once. I have another brother now, Sasuke said, resolutely, his eyes glaring at the training dummy as if it was his traitorous relative. And I'll make sure he doesn't turn out like you, Itachi. You'll prove my strength. I won't let him, Sasuke insisted. Because that's what brothers are for. Oh. Samurai of Tsunagakure. What an absolute monster Konoha had created, Samurai thought. It was late at night, but she couldn't sleep. It had already been a challenge before the exams. After all, they were in a village that they were supposed to invade in a month's time. Everyone around was an enemy even if they didn't know that. Now though. Now it was even worse. Where she had nightmares once in a while, all of them involving green eyes and lots of sand. Now they were an everyday thing, filled with the sound and flashes of lightning, a shining sword and a glowing pair of red eyes. The boy, Ig Sata, hadn't even spoken to her directly throughout the exams. He had mostly interacted with her older and younger brothers. But she had been there on all occasions. And she had also been there to see him beat the unbeatable. Or, at least, what she had thought was unbeatable. Gaara had lived through things that had made her stare in both awe and horror in equal measures. Gaara had killed people that could have easily annihilated her and Kankuro together. Gaara, who had never, ever been so much as scratched through his perfect defense. Gaara who would always end fights with his enemies dying a gruesome death by sand compression. That Gaara had been knocked around like he was a civilian kid against a fully grown jounin. That Gaara had been driving to the point of almost releasing the demon in him. That Gaara had been skewered with a sword and shocked to unconsciousness. By a boy younger than even himself, no less. What does one even call a person like that? Genius? Prodigy? Monster? Would he classify as a demon himself? She didn't know. And she honestly didn't care. The only thing she cared about, the only thing she was sure about, was that she wouldn't stand in front of that person when the invasion happened. No, she would take her brothers with her and run far, far away from Ig Sata. As far as she could manage. She would find a way to convince Gaara and she would knock some sense into Kankuro if she needed to. With their mother dead and their father increasingly distant due to his work as Kazekage, they only had one another. And she would be damned if she lost them too. Better a traitor than dead. Oh. Inoichi Yamanaka. Inoichi, I had a question, actually Ig Sata asked the moment we were inside his mindscape, the day after the preliminaries were done. The boy looked to be all right, despite what they were there to do, how they were going to do that and the problem that had caused it all. Inoichi could only marvel at the resilience of the kid, if nothing else. Yes, Ig. The Yamanaka clan head asked with a raised eyebrow. His eyes, however, strayed from the Sata towards the mindscape around them. It was scary, terrifying even, how much it had changed and how much more detail it had now. All those days back when he had initially entered it and he had seen the complexity and the sheer size of what Ig had created, he had known that the boy was someone exceptional. He had been told before, of course, but then he had known. And now, less than a week afterwards, the place looked nothing like before. Or not, really. After all, it still looked like a replica of Konoha. but the point was that there was so much more detail to everything. Before, it had looked like a painting, a very well done, very realistic painting, but a painting nonetheless. Now, it looked like they were actually in the real Konoha, if not for the absence of people around. The purple, fiery thing Ig spoke, breaking Inoichi from his appreciation of the unbelievable creation that was his mind. What even is that? Well, wasn't that a good question? Because, if Inoichi was honest with himself, we don't know what it is, the Yamanaka admitted, grimacing as his pride was hurt. He was the expert of Konoha when it came to the mind. There was probably nobody who knew more than him even outside Konoha. And still, that thing stomped him. The Orochimaru presence was easily explained in a number of ways. From the most simple, that it was an imprint the Sannin had made of his own mind to leave inside others so that he could control them, to some very disturbing theories that everyone was working on now that they had more information on what they had previously thought was a seal and nothing else. The purple, fiery thing as Ig called it, though, nobody had a guess on. Our best guess is that it's a corrosive element, for the mind, that is, Inoichi explained. The visual signs are there, as far as we can tell, but there are some very strange details here and there that still have us theorizing. Ultimately, we think it was supposed to weaken the mind for fake Orochimaru to have an easier time affecting the victims. The Yamanaka felt a sympathetic smile form on his face as the satyr frowned, slowly walking towards the cube he had made around the subject of their conversation. He could only imagine what having these things inside his mind would feel like. It wasn't a nice thought to have, that was for sure. Well, here we are, Ig said then, turning his impassive face towards the cube. The thing looked like the nightmare of any Yamanaka, if Inoichi was honest. Nobody would want to try and tamper with it, if told. He dreaded ever having to deal with such a thing. It had been increasingly difficult when it had been created, but now, he didn't even know the levels of skill one would need to even try to do something with it. The surface was so incredibly carved that there wasn't a single spot that wasn't used in a design of some kind. The pictures the faces painted seemed to hold no meaning, but they all looked like pieces of art nonetheless, abstract as they were. But that wasn't even it. He was sure there was more to it. Is there more than the surface? Inoichi asked, almost dreading the response. It's an inch wide, the boy nodded. On the inside face there's different designs, and that cube is connected to another an inch smaller. And so on until they touch the corruptive presence, whatever it is. A nightmare indeed, the Yamanaka thought to himself as he stepped closer to the construct. And, as the distance between the cube and himself lessened, he saw that there was even more than he had initially noticed. Carvings that he couldn't have seen if he wasn't right next to it. What could you have done if you were a Yamanaka? Inoichi wondered as a cold shiver ran down his spine. The feeling intensified though, when he remembered what followed on the schedule. Okay, let's see the fake Orochimaru now, Inoichi said, making an Herculean effort to hide how much he feared going there. That absolute hell that Ig had created to contain Orochimaru. As him and the boy sank under the floor of the mindscape, the clan head suppressed a grimace. He could feel the metaphorical cold sweat forming on his skin. Or maybe it was his body on the outside that reacted like that. He wouldn't be surprised. That place was. What inspired you to make this, Ig? Inoichi asked. What inspired a kid to make such a horrifying sight? His mind translated. I don't like losing my senses. I've been hit with a few genjutsu that do that, the kid said slowly. I hate them. And I'm also scared of them. So, I made this for Orochimaru. To share my fear, you know. He spoke, finishing with a slight smile that unnerved the adult more than he would have liked to admit. And, as the sight of the sun appeared before them, Inoichi could only think that Ig had succeeded. The man, someone that frightened people throughout the whole elemental nations, looked pale and sweating. Shivering in place, with his eyes darting around erratically. It wasn't even the usual white tone of his face that everyone knew him by, no. This one looked sickly feverish with his eyes encircled in black and sunken. The presence also didn't even seem to notice their presence there besides its now dull eyes suddenly stopping on them. It was more like looking through them though, recognizing that there was something there but without enough presence of mind to actually look at them. Inoichi almost pitied the fake. Almost. Everything seems to be all right, the Yamanaka said after a long moment where he wished he could be done with his inspection sooner. The less time he spent in such a place, the less chances that he himself would need a Yamanaka to help him. Keep checking regularly and I'll take another look next week. Sure, Ig nodded casually, as if they weren't in the middle of a specially twisted kind of hell. I'm very glad that you are on our side, Ig Sata, Inoichi thought to himself. Oh. Team Kirigakyo. I can't believe this. They took two of us out. Raijin shouted, punching a wall as if it had been the cause of all his problems. Even a day after the preliminaries, he couldn't stop complaining. Even Haku. And that blonde, how did she know that I could use lightning? How did she prepare for me? Ha ha ha, the rant was cut short as their Jounin sensei started laughing. She wasn't prepared for you, Brat said. Brat's eyebrow twitched at the way he was addressed. She was prepared for the kid with the sword. All of the Konoha brats, was Abuser explained, clearly very amused. Ig Sata. Haku answered, having memorized the name of the boy that held one of Kirigakyo's national treasures just like the other two genin had. That the nation hadn't hunted him down didn't mean that they didn't have an eye on him, that was for sure. So, Konoha's genin had him as a bar to measure against. And thus, they got that much stronger while trying to catch up. Zabuza continued after his student. And it worked wonders for them, that much we could see. We lived through a war, Raijin snarled. And you are telling me that they are somehow stronger because they had a stronger classmate? You didn't do much in the war, Brat Zabuza rebuked, his tone growing colder and sharper. Haku remained silent after that, while Chaojura made himself small against a corner of the room. The boy that caused the shift, himself, gulped and felt cold sweat running down his forehead. None of you did, not even Haku. He hadn't let the ice user do much, after all. He wasn't going to throw away all the effort he had put into raising the perfect tool just to have it die in the war, no. You might have battled here and there. Schoolyard fights at best, compared to what really went on in there, the Jounin continued. So, don't feel entitled to anything because of the war. And furthermore, he punctuated, leaning down and staring into the boy's eyes. When did he get in front of me? The terrified genin thought to himself as his hands and knees started trembling. Being in a war doesn't make you stronger than anyone else. It all comes down to how much you work for that strength. Am I clear? Yes, sir. Raijin, and Chaojura, even though he wasn't the one addressed, replied with a straight back. Good. Now Zabuza turned his eyes towards the shy blue-haired boy. The only one that had passed to the finals. I'm going to enjoy training you for the rest of these silly exams. The boy himself felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He wanted to get stronger, yeah. But he wasn't sure how much he could survive under the demon's training. let alone when it was solely focused on him. However, he still stood straight and stared at his sensei. Chaojura might be shy and lack confidence, but he was the only one that had passed. And that meant that it fell on his shoulders to prove the might of Kirigakyo. And he would. Zabuza-sama, I would like to up my training too. Haku spoke once again, and his teacher had to blink, surprised by the assertiveness in the boy's voice. He had never heard him speak like that, least of all to Zabuza himself. The wielder of Kubakiri Buchao could only tilt his head and blink. I would like to add more power to my skill set, if it's all right with you, Zabuza-sama, the boy added after a moment of silence. Oh, so that's it, huh? The Jounin realized with a hidden grin under the bandages on his face. It made sense, in a way. Haku had never been so outclassed and so easily beaten before. He had struggled, of course, even failed, rare as it was. But the ice user had never been so clearly defeated. Of course. Wait. I want to train too. Raijin jumped, his competitive spirit awakened by his two teammates getting all of his hero's attention. I need more power, more speed, more skill, more, everything, he said. Because, ultimately, he hadn't been enough. He hadn't had enough power to overwhelm the blonde girl. He had skill, yes, but not enough speed and strength to actually make it count fast enough. And that had cost him the match. And that was a hit to his pride. After getting off the streets, he thought he was finally becoming someone. No longer was he going to sleep on an empty stomach. No longer was he beaten around to have what little he managed to get his hands on stolen. No longer was he just another weak kid, orphaned by the Civil War. He had been made a ninja. He had been called a talent. He had been put under someone as strong as the Demon of the Mist. He had been trained to be the wielder of one of the legendary swords. But, in the end, none of it mattered. He was beaten by something as simple as poison. Invisible and odorless poisonous gas, but just poison in the end. How humiliating was it, to be beating not with strength, not with speed, not with the elements, but with poison. He felt like that half-dead kid from the streets, starving and dying of thirst, once again. And he hated it. Ha! Zabuza barked a laugh at the fire in all his students' eyes. Prepare yourselves, brats. Oh! Ig Sata. So, Inoichi didn't tell me I started as I stood in front of Anko, once again. Did we get permission to try the cursed mark? Yes, my sensei replied, although she looked anything but happy about that, a scowl on her face and a heavy tone that was uncharacteristic of her. We'll try a few times and see how it goes and how it affects you and your mindscape. If we see anything that might even seem to be a problem, we are stopping that training immediately, no buts, no anything. Am I clear? She asked, steel in her voice. Crystal, I replied with a serious expression and tone, because the situation demanded that. Although, I was thinking. Always a dangerous thing, that Anko pointed out with a slight smirk, and I rolled my eyes. That I don't really have anything that uses lots of chakra. Or, at least, nothing that uses it fast, to take advantage of the mark's effect, you know. I explained lightly. It was a good thing that I had been told what the mark did at one point during my checkups, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to say all this before testing it. Yeah, that brings us to the second part of your training throughout the next month. Anko nodded, this time she looked even less eager to tell me. And that raised some red flags in my mind. After all, what could possibly make Anko more reticent than the cursed mark of all things? It was suggested to me that I can pass down the snake summoning contract to you, she said, and suddenly her reluctance made sense. You actually have the contract? I asked with a raised eyebrow. It had to be in Orochimaru's possession. There was no way the Sannin had just left it behind. No, she admitted with a shake of her head. But I can still summon them. And that way, I can get you a test to see if the snakes would be willing to work with you. It should be possible. More than that, actually. But chances are that you'll only be able to summon certain snakes, just like I do. Right, so, what do I have to do? I asked, because there was no way I would pass up on the chance to learn any summons. They were actually one of my favorite things in the Naruto world. And the game should make becoming a sage a serious possibility, which would be a great boon. There's a second option though, she continued, not looking any happier for having another possibility besides the snakes. Someone else brought to my attention. My mind idly wondered who were all these people that were telling her things about how to train me. Danza, most probably, but it sounded like there were more people behind all this. Hiruzen, mayhaps. That you could try to get your own contract, she finished, and I blinked while my mind rebooted. Huh? I asked intelligently. Getting my own contract? What? You thought contracts just appeared from nowhere? She asked, clearly amused by my surprise. There's a way to get into contact with the summon animals. It's very simple really, she started, going into her sensei voice, which she rarely used. You simply use the jutsu without a contract. It'll either summon one or several specific creatures that you are compatible with, or it could reverse summon you to a summoning domain. That can actually happen? I asked with a raised eyebrow. It sounded like one of those things that would rarely come to pass. And while I had a modicum of hope that it could happen to me, I liked to remain realistic. Game or no game, there were no guarantees in stuff like this. It can, she nodded seriously. I wouldn't get my hopes up on that though. You are great, brat, more than great. But this is the kind of thing that doesn't care how good you are. Then, what are the requirements for that to happen? I asked curiously. Nobody knows. Every known domain had different ones, and we haven't even been told what they were, she shrugged. Still, there's more than a little danger involved in the second option, regardless of which of the two outcomes you get. So, think about it and... I'll take the second option, I interrupted her resolutely. As previously mentioned, summoning was one of my favorite things in this world. I had often theorized what I would like to do, or what animal I would prefer to get. Ultimately, between snakes and some other summon, I would take the random one. Don't get me wrong, I actually liked snakes. I didn't like that they got such a bad rep in the Naruto world thanks to Orochimaru. Although, if I remembered Manda correctly, they were pretty bad themselves. And while I had worked with some of Anko's summons, there weren't many that were actually anything that could be called nice. Besides, what was the point of getting a summoning contract if you couldn't summon the boss animals? Could I even become a snake sage without the support of the bosses? I had many doubts in that regard. On the other hand, if I got the first outcome and only got one or a few summons, there wasn't much to lose there. After all, it would have basically the same utility that having a few snakes to use would have. And with it I had a chance to score myself a summoning domain, and that meant boss level summons and a path towards sage mode. I could take that risk. Besides, I was 90% sure that one person could have several contracts. So, I could ultimately decide to risk it with the snakes at a later date anyway if the bet didn't pay off. Actually, now that I was on that note. Although I continued, less sure than I had sounded before. Can one person sign more than one contract? Before I got any response, I got a smack on the back of my head. Interrupt me again, brat, I dare you, my sensei threatened. But yes, you theoretically could sign more than one. But chances of a domain summons to accept you go dramatically down if you have a different contract. That was unfortunate. However, I was pretty sure that I could convince the snakes to give me a chance anyway if it came to that. Especially after Orochimaru was dealt with. I would need to be pretty strong to get them to listen to me at all, but I could get there with time. That was just another reason to put off that contract for now. But first, I had to see if Plan A failed though. Option 2, then I nodded resolutely, grinning at Anko when she shook her head with a half smile. Why did I expect differently? She muttered to herself. And knowing you, I would be surprised if you didn't get a domain contract. So, how do we do this? I asked. From there, Anko spent the rest of the day teaching me the summoning jutsu's hand seals and the rest of the technique's details. Since I didn't have a contract, I could skip all the little nuances that would have made it a complicated matter. Apparently, I would have to relearn the technique once I got the contract, since there were many things that were specific for each summons, mainly in how the chakra moved with the hand seals, some even changed a seal or two. Well, brat. Unless you want more time to think, go for it, Anko told me, trying to look nonchalant. Her nervousness showed though, which spoke volumes. For a second, I wondered if she had been against teaching me this, but her hand had been forced. It was a possibility, after all. Still, I couldn't let this chance pass me by. Bitting a finger enough to draw blood looked a lot easier than it actually was, I learned that day. But it had to be done, and it was one of the quickest ways to go about it. And, at the end of the hand seal sequence, I put my palm against the ground and the black drawings extended on the earth. The circular seal extended under my feet until I was standing in the center of it, and then everything went black for a split second. When I blinked, I opened my eyes to a completely different sight and I couldn't help but grin. Jackpot, I thought to myself. Then, I actually looked around. Ha! I actually saw this coming, I mused, my eyes moving towards the biggest of the creatures that surrounded me. So, how do we go about this? Not a second after the question left my lips, one of the creatures leaped at me, fangs gleaming threateningly. Although, that might have just been me being hyper-aware of them. Those and the metallic blades attached to its front legs. Because of course it has blades. If the toads can have fucking swords, why wouldn't these have blades on their legs? I thought wryly. Jumping aside to dodge without needing to use any skills or jutsu, I regarded the group of probably very smart animals. My ears strained to pick off if something was moving behind me. Just as I was about to open my mouth and ask a question, because I really didn't want to mess up my meeting with the prospective summons, my eyes caught a thread moving towards me. Jumping over it, I caught sight of one of the creatures holding one end of the string while another had jumped just like the first, pulling on the other end with it. Once I landed again, I looked around and clicked my tongue. I wanted to talk, but it seemed that these things weren't up for it. Is this some kind of test, or do you just want to beat me? I asked, more confused than annoyed. Because if they were actually trying to attack me in any way with those attempts, then I was more insulted than worried. So, think yourself above us, human. A smooth voice spoke from behind me and I turned. My eyes met with beady red eyes on a pitch black body. think my children are too weak for you. I'm just wondering if there's a point to those attacks. Because they are clearly not on my level, I replied with a shrug. They do look rather small though, so I'm guessing they are young, I mused as my eyes moved to the first one that had jumped. That, they are the only creature to have spoken so far, continued. My best guess was that it was the boss, since it was by far the biggest I had seen as of that moment. It's been a while since we've had someone come to our domain, let alone uninvited. So, let's see, human, if you have what it takes for us to even consider having you as our summoner. Kumogiri, if you would. And then, a creature to her left moved. Its size was around halfway between the smaller ones that attacked before, that were about the size of my arm, and the boss lady, who was as big as a building, and not a small one at that. Its two front legs had blades on them, although these ones looked more like spearheads than katanas as the first animals had been. Its remaining 6 legs also had, although smaller, similar pointy ends. Its 8 black eyes stared at me from its light brown body. A very menacing-looking spider, I would admit, and that wasn't even considering that it was freaking armed. Just like the first one had done, it jumped. This time though, I had to flicker away from where I had stood. It was much faster than the first one, that was for sure. The arachnids all around us started stepping back, forming a circle with us in between. An arena of our own, it seemed. Cracking my neck as the spider turned, I took new ivory from the sheath I had it in on my back. My left hand held the wire while my right hand gripped the sword's handle. Before the spider, Kumo or whatever, could jump again, I snapped the sewing needle at it. The sword flew true, but the creature was obviously no idiot. It dodged just in time. That's fine though, I thought with a smirk. After all, new ivory was now firmly set on the ground behind the spider, its thread still held in my hand. With another flicker, the sword's wire hit the spider just like that duo had tried before with me, but that wasn't all. I instantly activated Stunning Thread and Chakra Flow, making the arachnid start to twitch madly. It got away, of course, but that didn't matter either. I had gotten a good hit in and I could work from there. With another flicker, I was right in front of it. Using intermediate Taijutsu's boost, I kicked the creature as hard as I could, sending it flying away and almost hitting one of the spiders making the ring. Then, I pulled on new ivory's thread to get the sword to come back to me. Catching it, I pulled my arm back for another throw. This time though, I switched my titles to have wielder of new ivory on me. While I was at that though, I decided to go all in and activate Bloodlust and intermediate Kenjutsu. The result was the sword literally appearing in front of the spider. It was a good thing that I didn't aim for its actual body, or the thing would have died then and there, probably with my chances for a contract too. I didn't know how well the Spider Clan, or whatever, would take me killing one of their own. Real spiders probably wouldn't care, but I knew better than to apply logic to the world I was in. Instead of one-shooting the arachnid, new ivory stuck itself on the ground again, this time in between the thing's legs. Letting the metallic string in my hand hang limply, I used several chained flickers in a circle around the thing. The result was a spider bigger than a human tangled into a ball with a shining thread. So I started, stopping my dash next to the now immobilized arachnid. Does this count as a win or do I have to fry her, him, whatever? I asked with a nod towards my incapacitated opponent. The boss spider hummed, and while its red eyes didn't move, I could imagine her looking between me and her underling. Were they considered underlings? Was there a better word for it? You are, indeed, not as bad as other humans that have come before us, she admitted, and I almost let out a cheer. If only there hadn't been the hint of amusement in her voice though. Kumokan, let's see if he is actually fit to make a contract with us, shall we? She said then, and suddenly realized that this would be a lot harder than I expected. Still, there was a corner in my mind that felt nothing but excitement for this. Of course, Kumohoshi, a deeper, obviously male voice spoke from behind me. And as I turned, I realized that yes, this wouldn't be easy at all. In a way, this spider resembled the one I had just beaten and was still held on New Ivory's thread. However, while that one seemed to have spears on its legs, this one seemed to have decided to go in a much more brutal route. This one had blades that were much longer and, on top of that, they were serrated, heralding a much more painful wound, if nothing else. Moreover, there was one more thing that made it much more intimidating than the previous one. It was bigger than the boss spider, Kumohoshi. I don't suppose you'll be slow since you are so big, right? I asked with an uneasy half-smile as I looked up at him. The only answer I got was one of the gigantic blacks snapping towards me. And when I say snapping, I mean fucking teleporting, because the thing was on me before I even realized that there was an attack coming. I flickered to the side as I let out a nervous chuckle. Thought so. Are you going to keep talking or will you ever start fighting? Kumokan asked, sounding supremely unimpressed. Gotta make conversation and all that. But we'll have it your way, big guy, I replied, flickering again. This time, when I stopped, I pulled New Ivory's string, which made the previous spider spin in the air as the wire uncoiled itself. It would have made for a somewhat comedic sight if I hadn't been focused on another arachnid. With intermediate Taijutsu and Kenjutsu still active, I called for running and free running. My improvised plan required a little more precision than what I had with the flicker, after all. With all my buffs up, I made a dash towards the gigantic spider. It moved fast, really fast actually, but not enough that I couldn't follow its movements if I really tried. That's why instead of being impaled by its second attempt, I jumped away and on top of one of his legs. Immediately, I made a nick on the thing's limb with New Ivory. It probably wouldn't do anything to it, but it meant activating Bloodhound's effect, and that's all I wanted. With even more speed, I could now play a little game with the spider while staying on the safe side and, thus, I laughed. Instead of addressing my clearly disrespectful display, Kumokan continued trying to cut me down with his blades. It was for nothing though, I could avoid all his attacks with my speed. Even when I couldn't, that's when the flicker came back in. There was just no way for it to get to me. As long as I had energy points, that is. That set a time limit to my little game, but that was fine. It wasn't like all my strategy was dodging him, no. That was just the amusing part. The more complicated part was tangling his legs with New Ivory's thread. After all, I had shown that card already, so he had to be wary of that. But, I made that less obvious, jumping around, taking some openings for attacks that wouldn't do much but made it look like I was actually trying on that front, and some other things like exploding tags, and maybe all that would be enough to distract him. At least, that was the plan, until the spider stopped, moved all his legs, and made my whole effort useless. It was a nice trick, that one, Kumokan commented, his voice not showing even a hint of mockery. Either he didn't show much emotion at all or he really thought it wasn't a bad plan. I decided to go for the latter, at least in my head. Thanks, I said with a sigh, before I smiled. But it's good that it wasn't just that, isn't it? I asked, cracking my neck and smirking at the spider, who shifted his legs, unsure. A good bluff too, the arachnid called when I just stood there for a few seconds. This time, a little annoyance slipped into his tone. But I just kept smirking, even as his blade limb flew at me. After all, I actually had a plan B. Knew Ivory had a nice wire, that much was true. But I had been using wire before I got the sword, and having a legendary version of my favorite ninja tool didn't make the normal one instantly obsolete. Especially so when nobody expected me to use it. Then, it became a card up my sleeve. With a well-placed flicker, I pulled on my plan B, and managed to trap 5 of Kumoken's legs, one of which was the bladed one that he hadn't used in his attack. Before the gigantic thing could try and pull itself free by sheer strength and size, I activated Stunning Thread, Chakra Flow and also Living Thread, to add a little more strength to the hold that didn't rely solely on me. The result was less graceful than I would have liked, since the spider still twitched, which pulled at me and almost sent me flying away. I still took the whole thing as a success. I was fighting an arachnid that was probably just below the boss summon, or so I assumed. Those were nothing to scoff at least pre-time skip. It seems this one has potential, wouldn't you say, Kumoken? The boss lady asked. When did she get behind me? I screamed in my mind as I all but jumped to the side and turned towards her. I didn't know if the amusement in her voice came from that little trick or the state that her friend was left in after our little battle. The big guy was still twitching, but had already managed to stand upright and seemed ready to give it another go, probably more serious too. It would seem so, Kumoken replied, although reluctantly. Granted, saying no would be like mocking himself, wouldn't it? I considered, holding back a snort. So, as I said before, I started casually, as if I hadn't been battling just a second ago. How do we go about? I was interrupted by a stinging sensation on my right arm. When I turned to see what was going on, I saw a pale pink, almost white spider, slightly bigger than my hand, biting on it. Just as I was about to smack it away, it stopped, pulled back and stared at me. When did it even get there? Now a deep, older voice spoke from my left shoulder and I turned again, this time to see a dark blue, almost black spider standing, on it. You are our contractor. You may summon those of our clan if you so choose to. Beware, human. A feminine voice, although not less elderly, came from the pink spider that had bitten me. That this privilege may be taken from you if you make a mistake. Was the double speech really necessary? I asked with a raised eyebrow, although a bit concerned about the implications of the bite. Was it another test? Was it venomous? Would poison resistance's 18 levels be enough? Regardless of my inner worries, the big black spider spoke this time. More like chuckled, really. They've been practicing Kumohoshi, that was her name, right, told me, earning indignant huffs from both spiders. As I said, it's been a while since anyone came here, let alone a worthy contractor. And they were bored, so they practiced that. It makes sense, I nodded. After dealing with the antics of, well, everyone around me, I was more or less sure that everyone worth noticing had one or two quirks, let's say. It was a surprisingly accurate way to tell if someone could be strong or not, as far as I knew. Most of the time, at least. So, Kumohoshi, was it? I asked, raising an eyebrow at the big spider and for a moment wondering how it could talk. A second later, I almost smacked myself for trying to see logic in this world. I really needed to stop that. When the spider nodded, or more like leaned forward with her body, I continued. You are the boss here, aren't you? I heard about summons having those. I am the chief of the land of spiders, yes, she replied. Then I thank you and your people for accepting me. I gave a slight bow. I would have gone lower, but I had on my shoulders what were probably these summons version of the small toads that helped Jiraiya go pseudo-sage. What were their names again? I look forward to working with you all. Oh, he does have manners, Kumohoshi said, and I could almost hear the smirk on her metaphorical face. I have to wonder where those were all this time. Well, we weren't allies yet, I justified, stopping myself from shrugging. At that, the spider laughed. I wonder how long it'll take for the talking spiders to stop being a weird sight. I think I like you, Brat, the boss spider commented, and I smiled. Having the chief or whatever on my side would definitely be a boon. The last thing I needed was having trouble with them hearing me out in a battle like Naruto with Gamabunta. Now, I only had to hope that they would actually stay with me if I needed help with a Baijua or something like the Toad had done in canon. It wouldn't do much for me if they liked me but wouldn't fight with me when I really needed it. But for now, I think you should go back. I'll probably summon some of you guys for training. Just to let you know, I told them, more to avoid them being annoyed at a random summon than anything else. I didn't know quite how that would go if I didn't at least give them a warning. I could use some sparring partners too, I commented. And we shall answer the call, a new voice answered, and I turned to the side, where yet another gigantic spider stood. He was as big as Kumokan, but, instead of blades, this arachnid was armored. Every part of his body was covered in metallic armor that looked like it would be very hard to pierce. I am Kumoiroi, pleasure to meet you, summoner. I withheld a laugh. Yoroi, really? Be sure to call for me to spar, Kumokan said then, and I think I heard a smirk somewhere there. Hopefully, I won't have to hold back next time, he added, and there was definitely a smirk hidden by his spider face. Also, I was told that there could be variations in the hand seals and stuff. I trailed off at the end of the question, as a little black spider walked in front of me with a small scroll on its back. Thanks, I said with a slight smile. Cheeky, are you? Spiders are always prepared, Kumohoshi offered as a response, although, to me, she sounded distinctly smug. Opening the scroll, I saw all the modifications to the jutsu. A hand seal changed here, different chakra movements there. It wasn't overly complicated stuff, thank God. A few reads, with a few sneak peeks towards the creatures around me, were all that I needed to memorize it. It wasn't like I was going to have to wait for long to start practicing, anyway. And I would also write it down myself, just in case. Then, with the contract out of the way, no fights in sight and all the talking practically done, I took a look around for the first time. Not at the spiders, no, but at the area we were in. It seemed to be a hole in the ground, really. A big one, to be sure, but a hole nonetheless. Kinda like being an ant inside a rabbit's burrow. The size was obvious though, considering that this place housed spiders the size of not so small buildings. Still, even though it was mostly earth and some roots hanging from the ceiling, the place had a distinct beauty to it. Or maybe it was a feeling. Aren't these places supposed to be legendary or something? I thought, my eyes noting that the roots on the ceiling of the cave /hole didn't seem to be growing at random. Instead, they seemed to twist and knot themselves together in patterns of some kind. It doesn't look like you need to be told, the pale spider on my right shoulder spoke then, almost whispering in my ear and effectively breaking me from my appreciation of the sights. But we spiders are hunters, and so will you be. Be patient, the dark one on my left continued. Care not for honor or fairness. Lay your traps, trick your prey and defeat your foes. You represent us now, hunter. Do us proud. The pail took over once more, and with those last words, everything turned black again. When I blinked, smoke was clearing and there stood my teacher, looking immensely relieved. Any bets on what my summons are? I asked with a smirk. Internally though, I made sure to carve the spider's words in my mind. They didn't seem to be asking for anything that wasn't reasonable and I wouldn't do anyway, but it was better to be on the safe side. A contract and a path to the Sage Arts would be great then and there, but mostly in the future. New skill acquired, summoning technique, spiders, LVL1. New title acquired, contractor of the spider clan. New perk acquired, contractor of the spider clan. My smirk grew bigger. Wolves? Anko asked with an interested look on her face. Someone was curious, that much is true. My face seemed to be all the answer she needed because she tried again. Lions. Spiders, I replied with a wide grin. Ha, not as impressive, but that's not surprising either, she shrugged. You wouldn't say that if you had seen the big bosses, I pointed out. Seriously, if Kumokan, Kumoiroi and Kumohoshi weren't impressive, I don't know what was. Also, spiders are pretty cool in general. You say that now, brat, my sensei said, shaking her head with a smile. So, no problems with the contract. A fight here, a fight there, nothing much, I waved off. Nothing much, he says. I heard her grumble and I almost laughed. I knew she would think that. Meanwhile, I called for the new screens. Summoning technique, spiders, LVL1. C-rank technique with which the user can summon spiders to help them. Hand seals, 5. Consumption, varied. Summon list, plus. First time with a consumption that outright says varied, I noted curiously. And the first time for that list thing, I frowned. Mentally clicking on the and getting an empty screen. I guessed that I would, at some point, hold the names for spiders that I knew so that I could see what I could summon. That was the only thing that came to mind, at least. It would require testing, but that was already on the plans anyway. Then, I called for the title. Contractor of the Spider Clan. Increases stats when fighting alongside members of the Spider Clan by 20%. A step down from Wielder of New Ivory. That's surprising and a bit disappointing, I thought, noting that it was 10% lower than the Swords perk. Still, if I put both together, I have a 50% buff. That's crazy. And last, but certainly not least, the perk. Contractor of the Spider Clan. Opens the possibility of spider senjutsu for the user. I had to make a physical effort not to burst out laughing. Perfect, my mind screamed gleefully. Just, perfect. Already planning how to creep people out with your spiders, brat? Anko asked, snapping me from my thoughts, but not taking away my grin. Done spacing out. I just stared at her, mind still considering the possibilities now open to me. Let alone senjutsu in the future, I could do so many things now, even with little, normal-sized spiders. You are creeping me out without the spiders, brat. Sensei. I'm gonna have so much fun from now on, I can already tell, I said. I've created a monster, she muttered, before a grin formed on her face, mirroring mine. I haven't ever been so proud, she added, wiping an imaginary tear from her eye. Now, tell me all the details, IG. Don't leave anything out. Well, first of all, besides the cursed mark and summoning training, I was thinking about making an elemental jutsu of my own, I whispered to her while she started mock clapping in excitement. I need the books and all, but I'm confident I can make one in 2 weeks. leaving 2 weeks to train it until I can use it with at least 1 or 2 hand seals needed only. You have any idea how unbelievable that sounds? She asked, breaking the act for a moment. Or how crazy it is that I believe you. I know I'm awesome. You don't have to tell me, I said, earning myself a punch to the shoulder. And I have an equally awesome teacher. That's more like it, she nodded. Now she continued with a grin returning. What did you have in mind for that jutsu? So glad you asked, Anko-sensei, I started before relaying to her my plans for the finals. You have no mercy for your fellow genin, do you? She asked as I finished my explanation, and she finished laughing at my ideas. I knew there was a reason I liked you, brat. It was a half-asleep me that walked into the forest of death that day, and it showed. My feet dragged over the ground, my eyes were more closed than open, and shoulders were slumped. My lips, however, curled into a very satisfied grin. You look like shit, Anko pointed out, ignoring any sort of manners while doing so. You also look entirely too smug, brat. I think it's possible to get it done by the finals, I replied instead of addressing her words. A second later, I let out a long, drawn-out yawn. Pulling an all-nighter might not have been the best of ideas. But I had gotten through all the scrolls and books I had gotten on elemental jutsu creation that Anko had given me. And I had also spent an hour or so checking if my idea was possible and how complicated it would be to actually pull it off. I also slept an hour at most last night, I explained. Seriously, sometimes I worry about you, brat. Really? She shrugged with a wide grin, as if I didn't know she was lying. I had to keep myself from rolling my eyes. So, are you gonna be okay to work on anything today? She asked with a raised eyebrow. I mean, if we are gonna work on the mark, I'll be wide awake, that's for sure, I commented with a grimace. After all, even with time passing, I wasn't even close to being used to the cursed mark enough for it to not feel like my chakra coils were burning me from the inside. That would change over the month. I hoped. Do you want to leave it for tomorrow? We can work on your summons instead, she offered, and I gave her a half smile that might as well have been another grimace. I knew that she didn't want to work on it. Especially since she was still working on her mindscape to allow her to try to do the same thing. But I was confident that my defenses would hold. I want to do it, I nodded resolutely, and watched as her shoulders slumped. The more I practice, the more under control I'll have it by the time I really need to use the thing. Besides, my jutsu idea relies almost completely on it. Fair enough, she nodded, and I almost couldn't see the reluctance that she still held to. However, she seemed to ignore it herself well enough. You've already delved into it in your battle with the eyebrowless freak, she pointed out, referring to my match with Gaara. You only need to do it again, only for a few seconds. We only have to train you to be able to use it without feeling pain, not on how long you can maintain it. Afterwards, we'll do some routine training. Nothing too strenuous, since it's just to do something while your body gets used to the effects of the mark. Sounds about right. Also, did you get the scroll? I asked excitedly, and she threw it at me with a roll of her eyes. Where she had taken it from, I didn't know, but my bet was a storage seal without smoke effect somewhere on her person. Catching it, I looked at the first few words. Yin release, intermediate mirage, I read with a grin. Genjutsu wasn't going to be my focus in the month of training, but I had slowly grown fond of the illusion arts. Besides, after seeing what the void did to the Orochimaru fake, I wanted to see if I could weaponize it out of my mindscape too. It would take time though, since that entered the territory of much higher-leveled genjutsu. Great, I nodded, throwing the scroll back to my sensei as I took a deep breath in. It was time to get started, even if neither of us really wanted to do that. It was a necessity. Slowly letting the air escape through my mouth, I mentally called for the cursed seal skill. Instantly, I felt my shoulder burn, like I had stabbed a white-hot knife through where Mark sat. Then, the burn spread through my body inside my chakra coils and I gritted my teeth. Hunching forward, I groaned and felt my nails dig into my palms as my hands curled into fists. Enough, IG. Anko said, and I deactivated the thing without protest. Almost falling to my knees, I put my hands on my legs and started gasping for breath. Cold sweat rolled down my forehead as I felt myself shaking. It was much worse than that one time against Gaara, that was for sure. Probably because that had been barely a second or two and now I had held it for. How long was that? I managed to breath out. 5 seconds, she answered instantly, her expression completely serious. It felt both like a lot more and a lot less than that, I thought to myself, still grimacing and struggling to breathe normally. Cursed seal, first stage has gone up a level. Nice, I thought, mentally sighing. At least that announcement made the pain seem much more worth it. It still sucks though, I thought as I felt my hands twitch against my legs. And also, chakra points, 530/675. The thing burns through my chakra like it's going out of style, I realized with a grimace as I pulled myself back to standing position. Cursed seal, first stage LVL2. Sacrificing their own chakra, the user can access the well of chakra given by the seal at the cost of their own mind. Increases the efficacy of jutsu by 10%. Consumption 28 chakra points every second. Good thing the consumption goes down with every level, I thought with a sigh. You good, IG? Anko asked, tilting her head to the side. Her voice was soft and considered. A rare occurrence, to be sure. Yeah, I'm okay, I nodded weakly. It really took a toll on my chakra reserves, on top of the pain, that is, I explained, and she grimaced together with me. Could you give me that scroll? I don't feel like doing anything at all, but I guess I can see and read. Sure, only for a bit though. Afterwards, we'll work on your taijutsu and kenjutsu, brat, she grinned mischievously, and I was glad that she was back to normal. Nice. Anko was weird at this point. Oh. Don't and you have better things to do than train genin? I asked in between labored breaths, new ivory held firmly in my right hand, as usual. My only response was a slash, courtesy of cat, that I blocked. While it was cool to have someone so high up on the food chain dedicate time to train me, my body was just a complete wreck after using the mark. It was the worst condition I had ever been in while sparring with the kenjutsu user. It was certainly a challenging exercise, I could tell you that. Less complaining and more defending, shouted Anko from the sidelines. I might or might not have said a few not very nice things about her then and there. And more dodging, she added, and my eyes widened. Oh shit! I cried, barely throwing myself backwards before a kunai buried itself on the ground I had been standing on. Nothing strenuous, my ass, I grumbled, stopping Cat's sword with new ivory's wire. This is a warm-up compared to what you usually want to do, brat. My sensei pointed out, and I had to admit she was right. I did so very reluctantly though. And I would never do so out loud, that was for sure. You suck, I replied instead, like the very mature adult in a child's body I was. Then I blinked and groaned when I didn't hear anything. Jumping to the side, I saw a handful of shuriken fly by where I had been a second before. You really suck. Redirecting another strike from the Anbu with the steel thread of my own sword, I twisted myself, taking advantage of that moment to slash with new ivory. He's fighting back, cat. Anko called out, and I cursed her inside my head. I knew what was coming. That was a bad idea, I internally lamented. That means we don't have to go easy on him so much. You really suck, I grumbled as I parried away both the sword and the projectiles sent my way by both my teachers. Intermediate Kenjutsu has gone up a level. Silver linings and all that. Oh. New skill acquired, Yin release, Intermediate Mirage LVL1. Well, that's done then, I said, stretching my arms over my head as Anko dispelled the genjutsu I had placed on her, which basically made me look like I was all colored in shades of blue. Gotta work on it in my free time. You plan on doing anything but training during this month, brat? Anko asked with a shake of her head. I thought we were past this phase of yours. I mean, we kind of are. But the finals are the finals. I want to do really well in them, I explained with a shrug. I went to speak again, only to be interrupted by a yawn. Brat, you better get a good night's sleep today. I swear, if you come yawning so much tomorrow, I'll kick your ass extra hard. Lighter training be damned, my sensei chided, and I felt the need to point out that the training hadn't been that much lighter anyway. However, I still had some self-preservation instincts. Sure thing, sensei, I mock saluted, withholding another yawn. I didn't even want to think about pulling another all-nighter anyway. I would need all the energy I could get if I wanted to make my insane training regime for the finals work. And that, coming from me of all people, should say something about how hard it was going to be. Also, tomorrow, we'll be working on jutsu, Anko told me as we walked towards the exit of the forest. Cat can't be here every day to train with you. So, we'll adjust our times to hers. You don't want to focus on your kenjutsu anyway, so I think it plays out. Yeah, it does, I nodded with a slight smile. So, I guess we'll be seeing some oversized spiders tomorrow. Might as well get some of the genjutsu training done too. I'll see if I can get the base jutsu studied for tomorrow too. Having that one down should help when I get mine all sorted out. Honestly, I still can't believe what you are trying to pull off in a month, she chuckled. And they call me crazy. Well, you were made to be my sensei for a reason, I guess, I shot back, earning a short laugh. Too true, she nodded. I'll have to up my own training or I'll be left in the dust. Don't push yourself too hard, Anko-sensei, I advised with a concerned look. You know you aren't young anymore. I gulped down as I held back a laugh. What did you say? Anko asked, slowly turning towards me, and my lip twitched up. You know how it is, Anko-sensei, I continued, with some of the best acting I had done in both lives. Which was quite good, if I do say so myself. You grow old and you suddenly aren't as. I'll show you old. She threw a punch at me, but I had already flickered away, running like my life depended on it. Come back here, you little shit. Oh. New summon acquired, little spider. I almost snorted at the screen. It was kind of funny that the system categorized what I had in front of me as a little spider, since it was twice as big as my hand. However, it also made sense, considering the sheer size the things could reach. Mentally calling for the summon list itself, I nodded at the numbers. Little spider, 10 chakra points. Around what an E-rank jutsu costs, I guess, I mused. It didn't really matter, since I could think of a ton of uses for the little things. Which is more, I kind of wanted to see if I could summon something smaller. A normal-sized spider would make for a great spy, I was sure. So, how's it going, little guy? I asked, and the thing tilted its whole body to the side. I'm a girl, the spider said, and the voice sounded so young, kind of like a little girl's. It would have been cute if it hadn't come from a spider. Actually, it was cute even coming from a spider. Sorry, girl, I apologized easily. So, what's your name? Shirakumo, she replied. So, you are the new summoner. I nodded. Mentally wondering why she didn't have her name starting with the Kumo like all the other summons I had talked back in their realm. The name fit her though, since she was a spider, obviously, and she was completely white too, except for the light blue eyes. Pleasure to meet you, Shirakumo. I hope we can work together in the future. I'm Ig Sata, by the way. I hope so too, Ig, she replied, and I couldn't help but smile. She sounded kind of eager, which brought the cuteness of her character to another level. Unable to stop myself, I brought a hand over to her and started scratching a spot between her eyes. Stop that, Shirakumo complained in the most unconvincing voice ever, and my smile widened. Nah, I don't think I will, I replied cheekily. A spider shouldn't be so damn cute, Anko commented, finally speaking up. I know, right? I'm not cute. Shirakumo whined. Honestly, with the way she was almost leaning against my finger, I didn't know why she was even trying. Did I get a Sun summon? Is this one to be my Gameikichi? I wondered, more than happy if that was the case. Look out, in Yuzuka dogs, you might have competition. Speaking of, I should make some time to visit, I frowned, even as I continued petting my new spider friend. Maybe during the weekend. Anyway, not that I'm complaining about just focusing on cutie here, Anko started, drawing another wine from the arachnid. But you said something about training genjutsu and such. What do you say, Shira-chan? I need someone to cast genjutsu on, I asked. Yes. I want to train. She exclaimed pitifully, and I got the impression that she was saying that to get out of the humiliation of me petting her or whatever. Pity that. Wait, Shira-chan. You are too cute. I just had to give you a nickname. Do you like it? I asked with a grin splitting my face. HMPH, she huffed, turning her body to the side. Definitely a Sun summon, I thought. It doesn't matter, I guess. Oh. Ig, long time no see. Hannah greeted me, and I heard the dogs at the back go silent for a second before starting to bark like mad. The guys have been missing you, the Inuzuka added unnecessarily. I've missed you all too, I replied with a smile. I've just had too much training to do, with the Chuunin exams and all, I excused myself with a grimace. But I decided to make some time to visit. I needed to take a break anyway. Don't work yourself to the ground. I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't make you Chuunin as you are anyway, she said, and I scratched the back of my head embarrassedly. She wasn't wrong though, I knew I was already good enough for the title. The problem was that I didn't know if I was good enough for the possible invasion that was coming our way. You know me, I can't go without training, I replied instead with a shrug. Then, I turned around just as a very familiar black and white dog came around the door. Yuki. I've missed you, girl. I greeted, bending down to pet the Ninken with a wide smile. The canine almost tackled me before she started licking my cheeks enthusiastically. Been taking care of everyone while I wasn't here. Yuki gave me a very positive bark. Although, judging by Hannah's dubious look, the dog might have been lying to my face. Not that she couldn't get away with it, anyway. I liked her, and all the others, entirely too much to be angry at them for anything. Not like I was the one that had to deal with the mess, anyway. Hannah had my most sincere sympathy. "How are the puppies doing, eh?" I asked, standing up and making my way towards the back of the vet. "They are doing all right, new ones come and the old ones grow more rowdy. You know how it is," Hannah commented with a grin. She really loved the dogs. It was no wonder she had decided to take care of them as a profession. "Well, hopefully anyone new will like the food I brought," I mused idly, bringing the bag I was carrying up for emphasis. It was a bit of a chore to carry such a big thing through the streets, and it earned me some weird looks, but it was all worth it for me. I think there are actual Inuzuka people that would like that food." "Never mind these guys," Hannah said, rolling her eyes. "I swear that giving you those recipes was a mistake. Now they rebel every time I give them the normal stuff after you visit." Sorry," I replied with a nervous expression, earning a light headbutt from Yuki and a bark. I took that as a "don't worry." Although, I didn't know how reassured I should be, considering that she was probably part of the problem. "Don't worry," was Hannah's response. And that was as far as she got before we stepped outside and I was immediately flooded with furry things and wet tongues. The vet's welcoming party was always nice, I had to admit. "Hey, everyone," I greeted, laughing all the while. "Come on, let me up. I have food and nobody's getting any if I can't even move." And just like that, in a split second, everyone was standing at attention, an arm away from me and in perfect formation. "That's more like it," I nodded with a smirk as I opened the bag and saw Hannah bringing bowls for everyone. "I swear, they listen to you more than they do to me," Hannah grumbled good-naturedly. "More like they listen to the food, am I right?" I asked, earning a snort from the older girl. "I'm definitely coming here more often," I thought with a small smile as I set the food for one of the new puppies and watched it absolutely devour the stuff. Honestly, training the cursed mark took a toll on me that I hadn't been expecting. It wasn't even anything really related to the mark per se, either. My mindscape was perfectly fine even after our training sessions. No, it was just tiring to be in so much pain. It left me more than a little cranky for the rest of the day, even if I tried to relax. I had never been so grateful for my little drawing hobby as I was those days. Also appreciative of the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the vet right at that moment. With some luck, both those things would help me get through my training until the pain subsided a bit more. For now though, I thought as my grin widened, I have dogs to feed and puppies to play with. "Oh. Okay," Brat and Co started during one of our training sessions, walking around me and twirling a kunai in her pinky finger lazily. "Today, I want you to try something." "And that is?" I asked with a raised eyebrow. "I want you to summon something and pour as much chakra into the technique as you can," she laid on me and blinked. Tilting my head to the side, I wondered what I could get using that much. Would that be enough for Kumohoshi? The elder spiders? I wondered, feeling myself grow excited at the prospect. Maybe not though, but I was pretty sure I could get, at least, Kumokan or Kumoiroi with it. "Okay, right now?" I asked. "Do I use the mark or did you mean regular chakra?" I asked then. Because with the mark, I was sure to have enough for anything I wanted. "Normal chakra. We won't be using any jutsu with the mark until much later, if I have any say in it," she told me. The way she said it though, made me wonder how much of a say she actually had when regarding my training. I liked to think that she was still mostly in control. However, lately, I had started to feel like Danza or someone else was pulling her strings regarding me. Especially with how reluctant she was with the mark and the initial summoning thing. And yes, right now my sensei, at least in name, added before jumping backwards and landing on a tree branch more than a little distance away. Don't look at me like that. I won't take any chances with your stupidly impossible feats. She shouted when I looked at her weirdly. Apparently, she expected me to pull Kumohoshi or something along that line. Okay, I thought to myself, taking a deep breath in and then letting it out slowly. Then, in an instant, I bit my finger and ran through the hand seals for the summoning technique. And then, when it came time to put my palm on the ground, I focused on the chakra that traveled down my arm, pushing more and more energy into it. The black seals on the ground grew under me, more and more, until they covered almost the whole clearing. When I started to feel faint and my body started shaking a bit, I cut the flow and let go of the jutsu. A cloud of smoke covered the forest and I felt myself move upwards as something appeared under me. Soon, my head was sticking out of the grey mist from the upper side. As the wind sent the stuff away, I looked down and grinned from ear to ear. Hey there, Chief. I called out enthusiastically. Ho! Kumohoshi exclaimed, sounding surprised, or maybe impressed. You managed to summon me so soon. We might have found a very good contractor, it seems she voiced, although I wasn't sure if she was actually talking to me. Sorry if I interrupted something, I told her, looking down at her red eyes. My sensei wanted me to try using as much chakra as I could manage, I explained, mentally calling for my status screen to check on my chakra reserves. Chakra points, 5/675. I whistled at the numbers. No wonder I feel like I'll pass out any moment, I thought, feeling myself grow weary by the second, the excitement of summoning the boss spider leaving me. New summon acquired, Kumohoshi. That's nice, I mused tiredly. Do you mind if I sit on you? I'm spent here, I asked the gigantic spider. Go ahead, she replied, moving her body up and down with her legs in what I assumed was her version of a shrug. Or maybe it was a nod. Regardless, I all but let myself fall down on her, taking a deep breath as I tried to regain some strength. New perk acquired, Spirit Surge. Oh! My eyebrows flew up at the sight of the screen. Instantly, I called for the actual screen of the perk to see what it did. As I read it though, my eyes widened and my mind cleared instantly. Spirit Surge. Increases chakra point gain for every chakra level by 50%. Increases chakra point regeneration by 100% every 10 levels of chakra. What the hell? I almost screamed. Not only did the chakra point gain, together with calm spirits effect, mean that I basically had twice as much as I should have now, but that regeneration buff. Damn, I don't even know how much that is. What was the number I had calculated? 2% every 10 minutes or so. I mused, frowning as I recalled the numbers. It used to take around 8 hours to recover my full chakra points, but now. I did the math quickly in my mind. A little under 2 hours. I realized, almost laughing incredulously. You okay there, brat? I heard Anko call, snapping me out of my thoughts. Yeah. Just tired, that's all. That, and I summoned the fucking spider boss. I replied, still grinning from ear to ear. With 2 things left to check on, I called for my new status screen and the summon list. Chakra points, 14/900. Cursed chakra points, 0/9000. That regeneration is already showing, I see, I thought, more than a little pleased with the sight. I can almost make the over 9,000 joke, was my next thought, amusingly enough. I don't even remember where that was from, I realized, which dampened my mood a little bit. Shaking my head, I turned to the other screen. Kumohoshi, 600 chakra points. So, I didn't need to use that much chakra, huh? I noticed. Wonder how much the elder spiders need then, I mused. For now though. So, Kumohoshi, I started speaking out loud, grateful that the spider had just sat there, waiting. I was still half out of it from spending so much chakra at once. I have to recover some energy, but do you feel like chatting for a bit? I would like to know more about the spider clan. Anything to avoid going back and hearing Kumo-kun make excuses about his fight with you, Contractor the spider replied, speaking very seriously, despite what she was actually saying, and I snorted. That sounded like something I could bring up with the blade user at a later date. Call me IG, please, I told her. We have much to talk about. It was a beautiful sight, the one created by my new jutsu. Maybe it was a bit arrogant of me to say so myself, but I couldn't care less at that moment. After all, it gave me a similar sensation to the one I felt the first time I used a jutsu at all. It had that magical touch to it, I guessed. I watched it for a moment, the amalgamation of lightning moving around me without a clear target to it. Since it was made of lightning, it had a distinctive white color with touches of light blue here and there. It also had, however, some odd-colored details inside its mouth and on its eyes, almost darkening in those areas and with more purple than blue. Still, it was very much a lightning beast as the name implied. New skill acquired, lightning release, lightning beast tracking fang, LVL1. That's a long-ass name, I thought wryly, the ridiculous title of the technique breaking me from my awe, annoyingly enough. At the same time, my focus slipped from my mind and the hound-shaped electricity dissolved until only a few straying sparks remained. Then, the clearing was filled with silence. You really got it down in a week, Anko said, appearing right next to me. And I'm left wondering, once again, if my only role here is to give you scrolls and spar with you, she mused out loud, holding her chin between her fingers. Is there supposed to be anything else to do as a sensei? I asked sarcastically. I understood though. I had saved her a lot of trouble, absorbing everything and anything that she had to teach. Where others might have had to deal with some annoying personality trait or another, she only had to teach and I would learn it. My annoying personality trait was, after all, working too much, apparently. And the sword of fork knowledge that hung over my head gave me all the motivation I needed to keep that attitude. Not to mention the benefits of Danza's little assignments and my last life's memories giving me a slightly better mentality. Besides, I continued with a shrug, my eyes trailed towards the side, where my jutsu's beast had charged by a moment ago. You've been teaching me how to fight together with my summons, I added, because it was true. I had somewhat of an idea about how to fight with people thanks to her teachings from some time ago, but fighting with giant spiders was a completely different thing that I had to adapt to. She had been the one to guide me through that part of my training. Kumohoshi had been delighted with her for that. Well, that was as good as a first attempt could have gone, at least by your standards, Anko told me with a light chuckle at the end. 1 week, seriously. How's your 2 weeks insane plan, huh? She asked then, referring to the jutsu that I wanted to create based on the lightning beast tracking fang. I'm definitely shortening it to lightning beast, I thought to myself. Well, it's going. I might need some more time. But a month is definitely enough to at least create it and get some practice, I replied with a grimace. Maybe I had overestimated myself by trying to create an elemental jutsu in 2 weeks, especially when I hadn't even had any knowledge in the subject before that. The only reason I thought it possible in a month was because it was based on an existing jutsu, the Lightning Beast one. I still think you are insane, my sensei said with a wide grin. But that's fine. Besides, I've seen you achieve some pretty crazy shit. HMPH. A huff interrupted the conversation and both Anko and I turned to my shoulder, where a white spider sat. A month to create such a jutsu is impossible. Now that's a challenge if I ever heard one, I thought with a smile that matched my teacher's. I think I'll create another by the end of the month, just to rub it on your face. HMPH, the spider repeated. Another? Anko asked, this time sounding genuinely skeptical. Oh, you'll both see. You'll love it, Anko-sensei, I added, already having a good idea of what to do. After all, once I created one, the other should be relatively easy. Yeah, I can see it, I thought with a grin that showed many teeth, thinking of all the sound ninjas I could take care of with such a technique. You are one scary brat, Anko commented with a matching grin. I love it. I learned from the best. Oh yeah, you did, she nodded, preening at my words. If nothing else, I taught you how to be a right terror. Idiots, the both of you, Shirakumo grumbled once more. Someone's just angry that I got them with a genjutsu, I sang mockingly as I prepared to give the Lightning Beast another go. Before that though, I wanted to look at the skills screen. Lightning Release, Lightning Beast Tracking Fang, LVL1. C-rank technique with which the user creates a beast-shaped lightning attack to attack a target. Hand seals, 10. Consumption 39 chakra points. Not very different from electromagnetic murders, but I expected that, I noted quickly. No, I'm not, the little spider exclaimed, scandalized by what I had said. It would have made a much more convincing argument if not for I'm definitely not, you idiot. And I won't practice genjutsu with you anymore. That doesn't have anything to do with you having trouble dispelling, I'm sure, I commented, holding back a laugh. Shut up. I'm just messing with you, Shura-chan, I reassured softly and brought a hand to scratch her between her eyes. Besides, everyone has to start somewhere. I was just a normal civilian kid a few years back. Still hard to believe that is the truth, but I know it is, Anko added her 2 cents with a snort. Shut up, Shirakumo repeated, this time more of a mumble than an indignant shout. Say, what should I have the hound do, any ideas? I asked my little partner and the spider perked up. I had to make a conscious effort to not grin as her legs straightened and she seemed to grow taller, her blue eyes staring right at mine. Oh. Hey, Anko, you are late. I called out from our clearing in the forest of death. So, am I giving the cursed seal another try? Because. My sensei said, and my mouth clicked shut as I took in both her serious voice and her blank expression. Come with me, right now. With that said, she turned around and I blinked. My mind took a split second to catch up with that before I jumped after her when she started hopping back to where she came from. I almost had to use a flicker or two just to keep up with her. She was going that fast and I didn't know why, which worried me more than a little bit. Anko. Anko. What's going on? I asked once we stopped in front of the Hokkage's building. Had something happened? Had someone uncovered something from me? It couldn't be Danza and Root. I was under the impression that they knew about all that. Was I wrong? She started as we stepped inside. If I tell you right here, right now that you have to create an A-rank genjutsu, what would you tell me? She asked, dead serious. Well, I haven't gotten to Advanced Mirage or Greater Mirage yet. I considered, my mind running through my jutsu creation knowledge. I also haven't been studying genjutsu creation, so, it depends, really. On what, and how? She asked as reached the Hokage door, and I continued trying to make any sense of the situation I was in. When she opened the door, I froze. Tell me, IG. What would you need to create such a jutsu? For a second, my mind refused to work. I think, however, that it was justified. After all, it wasn't every day that I walked into a room with the leaders of not one, nor two, but 3 ninja villages inside. There sat Hiruzen, a very familiar visage at that point. But to his right stood one of the most gorgeous women I had seen in my life, and also one of the most dangerous if I had to bet. With red hair, piercing green eyes and blue clothes, never mind the kid hat on her head, she could only be my Terumi. And then, the real concern. To the Hokage's left stood a diminutive man, with the top of his head bald and long white hair hanging from the back of it. He had an angular mustache and triangular beard of the same color, all that making his big angry red nose stand out. Onaki, the Sushikage, and a man that frankly terrified me to no end despite how little I knew of him. Scarce as my information on him was, what I did know was enough to put the fear of that man inside me. It didn't help that none of the 3 kids seemed particularly pleased. IG Anko broke me from my thoughts, and I was acutely aware of everyone's eyes on me. I also finally noticed Ibuki's and Inoichi's presence inside the room, which had been previously overshadowed by the leaders. What do you need for that? I swallowed my nervousness and narrowed my eyes as I remembered that she had actually asked a question. Focusing solely on that. A week to learn the higher-leveled mirages, then. With Greater Mirage I should be able to do just about anything. Why would I need to create a jutsu? Would you be able to emulate what you have used to trap the fake Orochimaru with Greater Mirage? Inoichi asked this time, and my attention moved to him, my brows furrowing. No, I had thought that idea over, after all. I was sure it wouldn't be the same. It was one thing to fool someone's sense of sight or hearing. But taking away all senses was something else entirely. There was a reason why pain was a good way to get out of genjutsu. You want me to make that happen? I asked unnecessarily as I started thinking again. I would need a week or 2 to study genjutsu creation, at the very least, maybe more, since I don't know what I'm getting into. If it's anything like elemental jutsu creation, a week of dedicated study should be enough to start with the actual thing, a month maybe more. In any other situation, the baffled expression that the Mitsukage made at the end of my little speech would have been very funny. That, or the supremely smug smirk on Hiruzen's face. But the increasingly annoyed grimace Onaki was wearing put a real dampener on that. A month at the least, then. The Hokage asked with a growing grin. Maybe more, I added, uneasy. I suddenly feel like our chances of getting our sword back are much lower than I initially thought. Mai commented, recovering from her surprise and raising an eyebrow at me. I simply shrugged sheepishly under her stare. So, what do you say, Mai, Onaki? Hiruzen asked, his expression shifting back to the same one I had seen on him when I entered the room. All around, the atmosphere became tense as both leaders turned to the Hokage. I think we can afford to do as you say. Hiruzen Terumi was the first one to answer, her voice calm and composed. This better be as serious as you make it sound, Onaki voiced then, still scowling. 2 of my shinobi are participating in this exam. 1 is my own granddaughter. And despite how many of your brats you threw at this thing to improve your chances, we are still going to come out on top. This better not be a trick. I assure you, I have no need for tricks. I have complete faith in my genin. Hiruzen denied easily, his eyes darting for a brief moment towards me. No pressure, right, old man? I thought to myself, withholding a grimace. We have solid proof that Orochimaru has plans. HMPH Onaki huffed. Were they talking about the crush? Had something been found about that? What did me creating a void genjutsu have to do with that? And, more importantly, why was Hiruzen discussing that with Onaki of all people? I could get, we were sort of allies with the mist. But the stone. They would happily join the sound and the sand, wouldn't they? In the end, all those questions remained unanswered as I was dragged out of the room by Anko, followed by Ibuki and Inoichi. What the hell was all that about? I asked, unable to keep my confusion and curiosity at bay. That was how you got your next mission, IG Anko replied, looking ahead as she walked towards the entrance of the building. Your main priority is to make that jutsu, you understand me, IG, she ordered, more than told. It was really creeping me out, the way my sensei continued to be dead serious about this whole thing, and that should tell you something about her. When Anko not making jokes was more worrying than meeting 3 ninja village leaders. Okay, I can make that happen in the time I gave. I'm pretty sure I can, at least I mused, my mind already running through my jutsu creation knowledge once again, trying to see what could still apply when working on a genjutsu. Brat, I turned to Anko, only to realize that she wasn't the one that talked. Instead, my head snapped to the side as I felt a hand settle on my shoulder. Right next to me stood Ibuki, staring at me with penetrating eyes. Something that was only enhanced by the scars on his face. The necessary scrolls and books will be delivered to you before the day ends. Make it happen, and the whole village might be in your debt. So, they know something's going on, but they don't know about the crush. That's the vibe that I'm getting here, I thought as I nodded to the man. Why do they want the void genjutsu though? I wondered with a frown. In the end, I simply shook my head and focused on what I was, apparently, going to be doing for a month. Not that it seems to matter anymore, but what about my training for the finals? I threw out the question, not really minding one way or another. I didn't need my training for the exams, after all, I needed it for the crush. But if what I was doing was to aid in that, then I could forego the training. But considering that I told them I needed a month and we only had 3 weeks until the finals will be delayed, Ibuki answered the question, and I wondered why the man was still walking with us. After all, we had left the building already. At this rate the whole thing will be delayed a whole year, I muttered with a slight grin that widened when I heard Anko snorting next to me. Makes me wonder why it wasn't just skipped a year or something. Me too, brat, me too, my sensei agreed, and I relaxed a little. Okay, back to normal, good, I thought to myself. Although, how long will it be delayed? I asked this time, more to keep the conversation going. If I was left to my own devices, I would start worrying over the future and what all these could mean for it. I really didn't feel like dealing with that at that exact moment, or ever. A month, most probably. The Kijis must be talking that over right now, the man explained patiently. This is where we go our separate ways. He nodded towards where he was apparently going, and turned to me. I hope you didn't lie in there, brat. We might need that jutsu very soon. As the man left, I let out a sigh and my shoulders slumped. Yeranko nodded, her expression a half grin that was more of a grimace than a smile. This whole situation is very shitty, I'll admit. You don't have much luck, do you, brat? She asked, turning to me. You have no idea, I thought, remembering how my past life went. Well, I have studying to do, it seems. Will I use all my time on that? Because I want to keep up with the mark training, at least, I told her as we started walking again. I really want to be done with the pain thing, not gonna lie. Yeah, I get you. She nodded slowly, her hand moving to massage her marked shoulder. You know what, after you get some genjutsu creation knowledge in that dangerous head of yours, we'll see. First priority is getting that jutsu done as soon as possible. Sounds like a plan, I nodded. Oh. Onaki, Hisashikage. What a mess. Onaki couldn't help but think, as he finally allowed himself to relax in the privacy of his room. Privacy that he had had to make sure was actually there, since he wouldn't trust foreign ninja with anything at all. Except maybe the one. Regardless of his thoughts on Konoha's ninja, his mind pushed on with the topics that occupied his thoughts as of late. First, and foremost at that moment, was the threat of Orochimaru of the legendary Sannin. How the Leaf managed to create so many traitors while also making them a worldwide threat, he couldn't fathom, but it happened. And this one, in particular, was a very dangerous one to leave alone. Onaki would know, some of his own people had been victims of the snake and the aftermath never was a pretty sight. The Sashikage could almost hear his councilman telling him to join with the missing nin, to destroy Konoha with one of the weapons that they had created themselves. The hate ran deep in most circles, especially after how the last war had ended. Everyone had lost someone in that failed invasion. However, Onaki was tired, so very tired of wars. He had survived 3, and if he never got to see another one, it would be too soon. And he wouldn't be the one to instigate another, which is what this would cause. Yes, joining in on whatever Orochimaru had cooked up for Konoha could potentially erase the biggest threat in a world shinobi war right at that moment. However, Kumo would remain, and, despite how poorly they had done during the Chunin exams, Onaki knew they were a force to be reckoned with, especially considering how in control of their beasts the Cloud's Jinchurikis were. Killer Bee was a monster back during the Third Shinobi War, going as far as earning the respect of one Minato Namikaze, the nightmare of more than one Stone Citizen and Shinobi, even if they wouldn't admit that. And since then, Onaki was sure they had trained their other Jinchuriki to be just as dangerous now that they had a way to control the beast's power. And that wasn't even going in depth on some of the other things that the Cloud had done to strengthen itself. Onaki was sure they were readying themselves for the Fourth War. And now, with the sand so pressured in the Leaf's shadow, with the mist finally stopping fighting itself, and with the Leaf itself recovering from the war and the Kyuubi, Onaki was so very grateful for Hiruzen's more pacifistic approaches. Especially since that would probably translate into the mist joining the peace side too. The sand, he wasn't so sure about. However, whatever flimsy peace they had attained would vanish into thin air as soon as one of the nations lost the smallest bit of power. The Sashikage was sure that the smallest of openings would be used by Kumo to start another war that they were probably sure they could win. Onaki himself wasn't sure they would be wrong on that account either. The old man sighed, closing his eyes and massaging his forehead. A knock on his door brought him back to the present as he heard the voice of one of the reasons he wanted peace so badly. Jisama Kurotsuchi called from the other side of the door and a small smile tugged at the old man's lips. Kuretsuchi and Kazuchi were his top priority since the day they were born, even above the village. The face of a young man with black hair and red eyes flashed through his mind then. Onaki owed that boy more than he would ever admit for saving Kuretsuchi's life in that god-forsaken forest. As soon as he had heard the tale from his granddaughter, he had half a mind to erase the whole thing from the world. But the issue had been solved by a boy with a better head on his shoulders than most people the Sashikage knew. The satyr had seen the problem with just letting Kuretsuchi die, something that he knew few of his own shinobi would have if put in similar situations with, for example, Hiruzen's grandson. And now, with what he had just witnessed after meeting the young man, Onaki was reminded of two people from his past. Both previous Hokages of Konoha, and both people that he had held a healthy amount of both respect and fear for. Damn it, Hiruzen, what do you tree huggers feed your shinobi? Kuretsuchi, how did the training go? Onaki asked as he opened his door for his granddaughter, who instantly started retelling everything that she had worked with while in the training grounds that Hiruzen had offered for the stone shinobi to use. The Sashikage had, of course, made sure that he had his own people guard the place to make sure nobody spied on his genin. Just so you know, the finals are being delayed for a month, maybe more. Did something happen? The girl asked instantly, her eyes narrowing. Evidently, she realized how odd such a thing was and how it could mean trouble for someone or everyone. Nothing that you have to worry about. Hopefully, Onaki added in his own mind. But it should give you some more time to work on your own techniques, even learn some new ones too. I see, the girl replied slowly, and the old man could almost see the ideas already forming inside her head. A proud smile spread over his face at the sight of her. I think I have some ideas. Do you have any advice about how I should go about facing someone faster than me? She asked hesitantly, and now it was Onaki's turn to narrow his eyes. True, her first opponent in the finals was a boy that specialized in taijutsu so much that it was like seeing a mini-green beast, for what he had heard. However, he had also been told that it was unlikely that the boy could use many jutsu, if at all. Onaki could hardly think that such an opponent had his hard-headed granddaughter asking for advice. No, it had to be something else. And from the rest of the participants, there was only one that could be considered for their speed. So, you are worried about the young satyr, huh? The man mused out loud, earning sputtering denials. He was almost worried, if he was honest with himself. I guess the best option would be to overwhelm him with attacks. Defense seems to be next to useless, with him carrying that sword with him. And dodging is right there too, considering how fast he seems to be. So, your best option would be to attack so much that he can't do so himself. For that, however, you would need to be fast enough that he can't get to you while also dodging your attempts. Throughout his little speech, his granddaughter listened with rapt attention, seemingly committing it all to memory. Onaki, meanwhile, wondered if this was so that she could prove to herself that she wasn't weak, after that event inside the forest. Or, maybe, it was to prove it to the boy that had saved her. To prove that she wasn't some damsel in distress. Or maybe even a combination of the two. He smiled softly as Kuretsuchi started bouncing ideas for her training off him. Yes, this is what I want peace for, he reminded himself. That's it, guy, for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.